Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanishalaakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasa Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for joining today. And so on the occasion of Teachers' Day, I'll be discussing about how the Bhagavad Gita demonstrates Krishna as an expert teacher. And we'll be having this in two-part session. So we'll also be going over the Bhagavad Gita. So to understand Krishna's teaching expertise, we will be doing this in three broad ways. There'll be I'll be using this as a whiteboard to write things. So there will be a textual flow and analysis that we'll be doing. That means what is the Gita and what is the Gita teaching? That we'll be discussing. And through that we'll discuss, while we are going over the 18 chapters, we'll be discussing also what are the needs of the student in that situation and how they are addressed. So that is where that expertise in teaching comes up. And another thing we'll be discussing, that the teaching can be driven in two ways. That one is the student has a particular need to know and the teacher addresses that need. But there's another aspect to teaching. There is the purposes of the teacher and how they are being pursued. So both are important. Sometimes the purpose of the teacher has to be emphasized. So whereby actually over the as we say, the teacher has to have a lesson plan, or over the flow, the teacher started, okay, this is what I wanted to teach and this is what I have been able to teach. But the teacher's plan and purpose should not be so domineering or overriding that if the student has some genuine needs, concerns, interests, they're not addressed. So all these three we'll be analyzing to explore how Krishna is an expert teacher. And overall, will be, because the Gita is fairly long, the Gita has 18 chapters and it has 700 verses within it. So it's not super long in terms of the narrative. It is actually something which can be spoken by somebody who's fluent in Sanskrit within an hour or two, depending on the fluency of the speech. But the point is, the concepts are many. So we're not going to go into all the concepts, but within the Gita's flow, we will pause at particular points and we will be emphasizing those points and analyzing Krishna's teaching expertise through those points. So I will cover about, depending on time, I will try to cover 5, 6, or 7 points totally in this session as well as the session next week. And broadly, these will be centered on an acronym: teach, So either I'll cover 5 points or I'll go on to 7 points, depending on how the flow goes. And we will towards the end have a brief time for question answers also. So let's begin. The first T is timing. There is a fundamental difference between, say, education that is, say, given to children and that is which is given to adults. For children, often the education is to some extent an obligation. The children, that's what they do. They learn, they go to school. In fact, learning is like their full-time job. They don't have a job in the normal sense of the word, but it's an obligation. You have to go to school and you have to study. But for adults, largely the education is based on relevance. Once a person is settled in life, does this really add value to my life? Is this really necessary for me to learn? It's only when that necessity is felt, that is the time when the learning becomes effective. Otherwise, if there might be a lot of wisdom available and even provided, but if it is not considered valuable, if it is not considered relevant, then when it is taught, it will not be of much effect. So let's see. Now the Bhagavad Gita's education is largely in terms of adult education. Krishna and Arjuna are both adults. And because they are adults, and it is not that Arjuna at this stage is a Gurukul or any kind of educational system where he has to learn. So while this particular principle applies especially for ongoing learning among adults, but this principle of relevance is something which can increase it increases the interest and the impact of the learning. When it is seen as relevant, it is seen as something which is needed for the person. Otherwise, it just becomes a ritual that has to be followed. It has to be done, let's do it. So quite often, its relevance is associated with timing. Generally, whenever you see relevant, that means it applies to the time that a person is in. Is this relevant for me? If we are studying a book which is 5,000 years old, is that relevant for me now? Well, the Bhagavad Gita is relevant because we are discussing here not just the teaching. So when you talk about Gita, we could be discussing its teachings, but you can also be discussing its mode of teaching. And we are focusing more in our session on the mode of teaching. This is our greater emphasis. And we will be discussing the teachings a little bit to the extent that understanding is valuable for looking at the mode of teaching. But both of these are universal. The teachings are universal and they are the mode of teaching that is also universal. That's why you can say it is universally relevant. It is something which is vital at all times, vital and valuable at all times. So let's begin with a look at the narrative structure of the Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, as I said, has 18 chapters, and its beginning, because chapter 1 begins, that has, because chapter 1, it has 46 texts. And then if you go to chapter 2, it goes on till it has 72 texts. By text, I mean verses over there. So it is not that Krishna goes there into the Bhagavad Gita, into the Kurukshetra battlefield with the intention to speak the Bhagavad Gita. Nor does Arjuna go there with the intention to learn the Bhagavad Gita. So what happens is that Arjuna is ready to fight a war, but somehow when he has to fight a war, he starts getting second thoughts. Should I be fighting or should I not be fighting? And when he has this question, there are lots of different kinds of things that we could learn from our education. Mhm. In the philosophy of education, there is often a question, what is the purpose of education? Mhm. So quite often, education is associated with means of living. In fact, that is the primary understanding of the purpose of education. That it is, okay, you take this particular job, you choose this particular career because then you can earn a good living. Now, if you learn, if you learn engineering, you learn medicine, you learn law, then you have means of living, and that is a valuable purpose. But a far more important purpose of education is meaning of living. And so this, you could say, is more associated with skills. Mhm. Whereas this is associated more with values. What brings value to our life? So means of living, it is more about getting things of value. We can suppose we get some vocational education, and through that we can earn some living, we can get this, we can get that, we can earn some money. That's fair enough. But hmm, but meanings of living, it is getting value of things. Now, by things, I'm not really using their objects only, but in general, there are various things in life, and which things are of how much value. What is more valuable? What is most valuable? We've placed the various things in a hierarchy of value. So that is about meaning of living. So that is what is the crisis that Arjuna faces right at the start of the Gita. What happens is when Arjuna is about to face the opponents, he is going to use the means of living, that is archery, and he is expert at archery. But it's not that suddenly he forgets how to use a bow and arrow. Rather, he has second thoughts about whether he should be using the bow and arrow at all. So what is the reason for Arjuna's crisis? Arjuna's dilemma, it is associated with a crisis of value. He's being pulled by two duties. He comes ready to do his Kshatriya Dharma. Kshatriya Dharma is that he's a martial guardian of society, and as per the Kshatriya Dharma, he should be fighting against aggressors. And the opposite side have been brutal, repeated aggressors. And that's how he comes in. This first part will be a little conceptual because we need to understand to some extent what the Gita is teaching before we can understand how it is teaching. So till about from 1.14 when we are introduced to Arjuna till 1.19, Arjuna is quite fixed in his idea that he has to do Kshatriya Dharma. He blows his conch and everybody else follows the lead. And they're all very confident and ready to fight. But then from 1.20, this is all the first chapter going on, from 1.20 onwards, he starts thinking of the Kula Dharma. And by 1.46, Kula Dharma is his. He feels that if all the opponents, they are members of my dynasty. So I feel that he should not fight against his relatives. So when he is having this dilemma, should he fight? Should he not fight? So in one sense, if you consider the narrative flow of the first chapter, if we considered, say, a weighing scale, then in Arjuna's eyes, initially, or Arjuna's mind, you can say, he begins with the Kshatriya Dharma being higher. The actually, so the Kula Dharma is not that important. He knows about it. His Kshatriya Dharma is higher in his mind. This is what I am meant to do. But this is the situation in 1 point till 1.1920. But then within his mind itself, his priority changes. And he starts feeling, these are my relatives. How can I fight against them? So the weighing scale balance changes. And he starts thinking that the Kula Dharma is much, much more important than the Kshatriya Dharma. And when he starts thinking like that, that's when he starts feeling, maybe I should not fight. And that is where Arjuna starts saying, oh, I should not be fighting maybe. Now, when he starts thinking I should not be fighting, what exactly happens by this? When he starts thinking I should not be fighting, the result of this is that he tells Arjuna, Visrujya Sasharam Chapam Shoka Samvigna Manasaha. So he says, I will not fight. He puts aside his bow. Now, one of the key principles in education, especially in adult education, is that one needs to teach at the right moment. So if you see throughout the first chapter, the dynamic of the Krishna-Arjuna relationship is that basically they are friends. Within that hierarchy, Arjuna is the warrior, Krishna is the charioteer. So we could even say that Arjuna is at a higher position in the hierarchy. Now, because as friend and friend, they're equal. As a warrior and charioteer, the warrior is higher. So Krishna doesn't speak much. Generally, if we are trying to give counseling to people, then till they seek answers, our giving answers to them will not be very helpful. If they think that they already know, then sometimes we just need to let them speak. So the first point is timing means, when does Krishna start speaking? See, Krishna goes along with Arjuna initially. Throughout the first chapter, Krishna just speaks 1/4 of a verse in 125. And then he just speaks 2 verses in 2.2 and 3. He's not talking much at all. Initially, Arjuna tells Krishna, Senayor Ubhayor Madhye Ratham Sthapayame Achyuta. Take my chariot in between the two armies. I want to see who is there. And Krishna says, okay, fine. Uvacha Partha Pashyaitan Samavetan Kuruniti. Partha Pashyaitan, just there's half a verse that Krishna speaks over here. So here, his speech is mostly descriptive. Okay, you want to see? Now see them over there. See Bhishma and Drona. And then in second chapter, 2.2 and 3, when Krishna is speaking more in an exhortative mood rather than an instructive or educative mood. Exhortative means as a friend. It's about the friend, come on, don't be weak like this. Don't give in to nerves. You are tough, man. Come on, fight. That's the mood. Because when the two of them are discussing, we have to wait till the other person is ready to listen. Now, as Arjuna keeps hearing, talking about this weighing scale, Arjuna is initially thinking that Kshatriya Dharma is definitely superior. Then he starts thinking Kula Dharma is superior. But then as he keeps thinking, he starts realizing, actually, I don't know. I don't really know. Which is better? Is fighting better? Or is fighting better, not fighting better? And it is at this point where he comes in 2.6. And here he is confused. And it is here that he surrenders. So whereas Krishna and Arjuna had a friendly relationship, in 2.7, Arjuna voluntarily becomes a student, a disciple, and he accepts Krishna as his guru. Now, when we are guiding someone, we may not necessarily expect the other person to come to a situation where they formally accept us as a guru. But sometimes we need to wait till they are actually asking questions, not just making an argument. So we make an argument, they make an argument. Sometimes we don't have to point out to them the hollowness of their arguments. They might be making some points, but people in general are not foolish. Life is tough. And anybody who has survived through life, live alone, thrived at any level in life, they have a certain level of intelligence. So now, of course, we can say everybody has more to learn, and that's definitely true. But we need to, the timing point refers to that Krishna gives Arjuna time to come to a learning mood. So now Arjuna, we could say Krishna right in the beginning could have snapped Arjuna out of his confusion and delusion, given him an instruction. And Arjuna was in tears. At 2.1, Tandatha Krupaya Vishtam Ashrupurna Kulekshanam. Arjuna was in tears in 2.1. Now Krishna could have said, why should my friend, be subjected to tears like this? Yes, that is true naturally. But sometimes those tears and the agony that they represent were necessary for Arjuna to come to a point where he could actually value what was to be learned. So timing is important. When do we speak about something to someone? Everybody is going through their own evolutionary process in life. And especially when we want to teach some values, if we are observing them keenly, then we can understand, okay, this is a good time. And that means a time when they have become aware of the inadequacies of what they know. The timing is that everybody has some knowledge. In some ways, humility means that we all have things we know. And we all have things we don't know. So we all come to a life point when we start valuing the things we don't know more than the things we know. Hey, maybe I don't know how to deal with this. So if we could come to that point, or we could wait for that person to come to that point and then speak, that is the time when they'll be the most receptive to learn. Now, while this is not always possible, but keeping this in mind will ensure that we can have the maximum interest and the maximum impact when we speak. So in one sense, as I said, the Gita has 700 verses, and out of that 46 verses are in the first chapter. So it is not a small portion. Krishna does not speak for almost 1/12 of the Gita. He waits. It, like if you have a 1 hour session or a 70-minute session, Krishna is letting Arjuna speak for 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. Till he speaks, till Krishna starts speaking. So that's the first point about timing. Now wait for the person to come to a place where they recognize that they need to know, and they are in a learning mood, especially when we are educating adults, or when you get children who are coming to adulthood. Sometimes just harping on something which they are not doing right only alienates them. But when they themselves realize they are confused and then they turn, then we will have far more desirable effect. That was the first point, P. Then E is the expansion. Expansion means that when we are trying to explain something, there are two broad ways of teaching. Now it's like, say the student is here, the teacher is here. Now the student knows something, the teacher knows something much more. So now the teacher could say that all that you know is wrong. And you just put aside everything and I'll teach you what I know. So it could be a rejection of what the student knows, or it could be a building up on what the student knows. Okay, this is what you know. I'll teach you something more now. And this approach of building up, expanding on what the teacher knows or on what the student knows, this is far more effective. Now, in one sense, this is implicit in our education. That say when a student goes from level 1 to level 2, so they learned something in English, and maybe they learned basic alphabet they've learned. Now they learn some words. Now they learn some grammar. They learn some figures of speech. They learn complex sentence of structures. So that is natural in one sense. So there's letters, words, grammar, like that, it goes on. So it's a normal building up. Now that is natural, but quite often when some teachers teach, their concern is emphasizing how what the students know is wrong, how it is useless. And this, it is quite possible that sometimes what the student know is wrong. That is also a part of education. So for example, in 3 minus 5, you might be told not possible. But later on, 3 minus 5 is told it's possible as minus 2. So now sometimes between a lower level of education and a higher level of education, there might be contradiction also. And if we tell the student that, okay, what you've learned till now is all wrong, that creates disorientation, that creates insecurity, that creates a lack of, that not only creates a lack of confidence, but that creates fear. What am I doing with my life? And this is especially necessary when we are talking about not just the means of living, but the meaning of living. Everybody has formed some worldview. And when we are going to tell them something more beyond that worldview, then we could say, oh, your previous worldview is all wrong. And I will give you the next right worldview. So Krishna does not have that attitude. Although in one sense, there could be a contradiction. So Krishna does start with Arjuna is starting with bodily consciousness. And he's saying, these are my relatives. How can I kill them? And one of Krishna's fundamental teachings in the very first teaching section in the Bhagavad Gita, 2.11 to 30, is to infuse spiritual consciousness. That the core of our being is spiritual. We are not our physical side. We are our core, at our core, indestructible spiritual beings. Now, Krishna does emphasize that. But while emphasizing that, what does Krishna do? Krishna does not reject Arjuna's concerns. Krishna doesn't say that, oh, you are an ignorant fool for being concerned about people's bodies. No, even after we understand we are the soul, does that mean that we don't care for anyone's body at all? No, there is caring for others is natural. And if we have bodily consciousness, then we care for the body. And that is what Arjuna was exhibiting in chapter 1. Now, when we have spiritual consciousness, then we care for more than the body. Not that we don't care for the body at all. So Krishna acknowledges Arjuna's concerns, but Krishna builds on those concerns. This is especially from 2.11 till the entire first chapter, 2.53. How is Krishna building on Arjuna's concerns? Krishna is telling, yes, you are concerned about Bhishma. That's good. That concern is valid. But who is Bhishma really? Who is Drona really? They are your grandparents. Is your grandfather. Is your teacher. But at their essence, they are spiritual beings. They are souls. And Krishna, what he implies, especially the one verse critical 222. If you consider the flow of the Gita, this 222, it gives the example of the body is like the dress, the clothes we wear. And the soul is like the person wearing that dress. And what does he say is that when the person's clothes become old, they take on new clothes. So similarly, a person gives up their body and takes up a new body. So essentially, he's telling Arjuna that those whom you care for, they are not going to be killed. Only they will lose their body, but they will get a better body in the future because they are virtuous beings. So basically, see, then there are concerns which Arjuna has. And then there are strategies that Arjuna is using to address those concerns. So from our concerns, arise the strategies. So what Krishna is not dismissing Arjuna's concerns. The concern is caring for others. So based on Arjuna's understanding, Krishna is telling, Arjuna was thinking initially, the strategy should be don't fight, because if I fight, I'll be killing them. But Krishna says that same concern is valid, no doubt. The concern is still the same, but the strategy with the knowledge of Atma Gyan, it becomes different. The strategy becomes fight to elevate them. So the same concern, caring for others, is still there. It's not gone, but caring for others with Krishna knowledge means it is caring for their souls primarily. So in general, we need to build on what people know. Rather than dismissing or deriding what they know, we need to build on what they know. That way, when it's an expansion of their knowledge. Now, when what we give them builds on what they know, then they feel reassured. They also feel equipped. They also feel empowered. Yeah, I'm learning something new. Now, even if this means emphasizing that what they knew was wrong, Sometimes that has to be emphasized, but that shouldn't be our sole emphasis. The world is a tough place, and when we are equipping people, we'll come to this education later on, again in the future, towards the end of our course, that in the last session. But the what people need is wisdom, knowledge, you can say, in education. But a good teacher also needs to give the confidence to people that you can learn this. Okay, this is what you need to learn. There is the content of learning. Wisdom is the content of learning. This is what you need to learn. But along with the content of learning, the content to learn, there is a confidence to learn that is required. If that confidence to learn is not given, then what happens is people may get the content, but they may feel this is too complicated. I cannot get this. And they might just abandon everything. So education has to be always built on an ethos of expansion. And Krishna himself both demonstrates and articulates this principle. Krishna demonstrates in chapter 2, as I said, that build on people's existing knowledge. But then he himself articulates this principle in the 3rd chapter, 22nd verse, where he says that na buddhi bhedam janayet agyanam karma sanginam joshayet sarva karmani vidwan yuktah samacharan. He says that he basically talks about 2 levels of people. The first level of people are those who are wise and detached, vidwan and yuktaha. And then the other are ignorant, avidwan and asaktaha. They are attached. And even when there is to be instruction given from somebody at this level to this level, Krishna says that don't disturb their minds, don't disturb them. Na buddhi bhedam janayet. So why not disturb them? Because if we disturb them, they might just lose their confidence. He says, Joshayet sarva karmani. So instead, he says, don't disturb, engage appropriately. Engage in a way that they can be elevated. So let's illustrate this with a concluding example, this particular principle, before we move to the next principle. The idea is, suppose somebody is coming to a temple to visit a physical temple, and say when they come to the temple, there is a giant cliff which they have to, from here, they have to take a high jump to come over here. Or they have to crawl with their hands and legs, and then somehow they have to come up over here. Now, most people, they will either not try to go up, or they will jump up and they will just fall down and injure themselves. So if people actually, if those who are constructing the temple, if they want people to come to the temple, then what they will do is, they will actually create steps. Okay, this is where you are at. Here, take one step up. Take another step up. Take another step up. Take another step up. Take another step up. And gradually you will reach where you are needed. So that way, this step-by-step approach, this is where you are, you take you forward from there. So expansion means, okay, you go up from here to here, from here to here, like that. You keep moving forward up. So the step-by-step approach is something which works much better. So build on what people know. Don't demonize or deride what they know to take it forward. Knowledge grows best by expansion, not by demonization, derision, or dismissal. So Krishna recognizes that Arjuna is also an intelligent person. And what Arjuna knows, take it forward from there. Then after that, when he's moving forward, I'll talk about the third principle today, and then we'll have some questions, and the remaining we'll talk in the next session. So A is appreciation. Now, appreciation means what? That when a person has some questions, at that time, how we address those questions is vital for that person's confidence in learning and growing. Suppose somebody asks a question and he say, that's a stupid question. Only a fool would have such a question like this. Then not only will that person never ask questions again, but nobody else will ask questions after that. Why? Because people nobody wants to be made to be feel wrong or foolish. They need to be appreciated. Yeah, that's a good question. So this is especially seen in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So we are jumping forward a little bit. We will address some of the points which are mentioned in the 3rd, 4th, 5th chapters also at a later time in the Bhagavad Gita. But here, in the Gita's flow, as I mentioned, there are 18 chapters, but there are 17 questions that are asked by Arjuna. Arjuna asked 17 questions, and he asks in chapter 2, there are 2 questions. In chapter 3, chapter 3 also there are 2 questions. There's 2, 3. In chapter 4, there is 1 question. In chapter 5, there is 1 question. In chapter 6, again, there are 2 questions. So we are discussing the 7th question over here that Arjuna is asking. And the way Krishna addresses this question, actually we'll be discussing 7th and 8th questions also. The 8th question probably we'll discuss in our next session. So here, in both 7th and 8th questions, Krishna acknowledges or appreciates Arjuna's underlying mood. There's the letter of the question, and there is the spirit, there is the mood of the question. Question comes up. In the question, there are the words, and then below the words there are the concerns. Now, of course, some of the concerns come through the words, but not everything comes out. So this addressing the words of the questions addresses the rational part. But people are not just rational creatures, they are also emotional creatures. So a good teacher, a good answer addresses both the rational and the emotional part. So let's see how Krishna does that for Arjuna. The 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is known as Dhyana Yoga. And this chapter of Dhyana Yoga, when Krishna is speaking, he explains how this process of Dhyana Yoga requires 2 aspects. The yoga there is austerity. It requires a lot of tapasya. Now there is the physical austerity of leaving one's home, going to a forest, sitting down in an erect posture and meditating. And then there is the mental aspect. Or the mental aspect is where one cultivates equal vision towards everyone. Suhrun mitrare udhasina madhyastha deshu bandhushu. Treat everyone equally. So now the physical aspect, Arjuna feels, yeah, it's possible. I've done this before. Arjuna has previously lived in the forest with his brothers and himself alone. He has performed austerities by which he has pleased the devatas like Indra and Shiva and got astras from weapons from them. But the mental part, Arjuna feels it's impossible to see everyone equally. He says, this, how can I possibly see somebody who is as virtuous as Yudhishthir and somebody who's as vicious as Duryodhana? How can I see them equally? That just doesn't make sense to me. So when he thinks like this is where he raises his concern. And this is addressed over 4 verses. So in 33 and 34 is Arjuna's question. And in 35 and 36 is Krishna's answer. So here, Krishna demonstrates, I'm talking about appreciation in terms of empathy. So Arjuna says that maintaining this kind of equanimity, yoyam yogastvaya prokta samyena madhusudana. That samyena, to maintain this kind of equality, equanimity, the steadiness of the mind. Na pashyami, I don't think it's possible for me. So, and then he says, why is it not possible? Because the mind is restless. Chanchalami mana Krishna pramathi palavadrudham tasyaham nigraham manye vayoriva sudushkaram. This equanimity is impossible for me because the mind is, he talks about, it's restless, it's relentless, it's ruthless, it's reasonless. And because of this, it leaves us less. We feel less, I can't do this. So when Arjuna speaks this, the first thing that Krishna does, he says, asamshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam. He says, asamshayam, undoubtedly, it's difficult. So this itself acts as a big relief for Arjuna. Oh, yeah, it's difficult. Oh, it's difficult. Now, just suppose a teacher student asks a question, I find this very difficult. If the teacher says, yeah, that's just because you're lazy. If you had only been more attentive, you would have found it easy. No, the teacher says, yeah, this is a difficult part. But you don't try to understand everything right now. Just try to see what you can understand and build on it. If you have some specific questions, we can discuss later. So when Krishna says, undoubtedly this is difficult, what he is acknowledging and appreciating Arjuna's concern. See, a student could very well say, it's difficult, forget it, I won't study this only. Even if I don't do well in this particular paper, I will do well in some other paper and I will move on. If the student is actually expressing, yeah, this is difficult, that means the student is concerned about learning the subject. And the student feels, yeah, maybe this is difficult for me to learn. So the appreciation that is required, the appreciation can be that even the question, the hesitation indicates the student's eagerness to learn. And we can appreciate that eagerness to learn. There's also the student's courage in confessing the difficulty. Whenever somebody raises a question where they're actually, I find this difficult. It's so easy for that person to be laughed at by others. You find this difficult. That just shows how foolish you are. No, it requires courage to express. When they're confessing difficulty, they are actually expressing vulnerability. And this is something very difficult for most people to do. And if somebody is doing that, we need to actually acknowledge that. We need to appreciate that. To the extent we appreciate this, to that extent, the student can feel vindicated, can feel reassured. So first thing that Krishna says, asamshayam mahabaho manodur nigraham chalam. He says that, yes, Arjuna, it is difficult, undoubtedly difficult. Oh, I'm not alone. I'm not foolish. I'm not a loser in feeling that this is difficult. That itself gives a relief. Generally, when people lose confidence, see, most people don't lose confidence because they are unable to do some things. When there is loss of confidence, this is the concluding point. One of the biggest characteristics of a good teacher is that the teacher should ensure that the student never loses confidence. When a teacher is speaking to a student, the student should, at the end of the interaction, feel encouraged, feel confident. I can do this. Yeah, maybe I have to work hard and it's not going to be easy. There is this mistake which often teaching involves, teacher is involved. Sometimes people think encouragement means telling people that it's easy. Encouraging people doesn't mean telling people it's easy. Sometimes people feel, yeah, it's not easy, it's difficult. And I have to tell people about that. So if we think encouragement means telling people it's easy, that could be misleading. And we ourselves may not feel like doing it. But encouragement doesn't have to mean telling people it's easy. Encouragement means telling people it's doable. It may be tough. May be tough. It may require a lot of effort, but it's doable. So what is the emphasis of the teacher? That is very important. And that emphasis very much comes out in the tone, in the mood, in the articulation of the student, of the teacher. The same point can be said in the exact same point can be said in two opposite ways. So one way, for example, I'll conclude this point now. Even though this is tough, it can be done. Even though this is tough, it can be done. On the other hand, the teacher says, even though this can be done, it is tough. So now, here what is happening is, the point conveyed in these sentences is the same. But in general, in writing, the principle is, whatever is conveyed at the end of a sentence, that is what is remembered. And even though this is tough, this can be done. This is actually encouraging. Whereas, even though this can be done, it is tough, this is discouraging. So it's important that we be aware of what we are telling people. So what Krishna does is, if you see Krishna's wording, in 635 is this. Asamshayam Mahabaho. It's tough, undoubtedly, but it can be done. And now, specifically, how it can be done, that can be elaborated afterwards. But we appreciate the student's difficulty, and we appreciate that the student's concerns are valid. And then we move forward and explain. So, Krishna is actually showing us the values of an empathic teacher, a teacher who understands and appreciates the concerns of the students. So I'll summarize what I discussed today. I discussed three main points about what do we learn of Krishna as a teacher. We started by talking about here our focus is not going to be so much on the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita as the mode of the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. So we will be going through the flow of the Gita, looking at, if you consider the 0 point, if you want to say, what we are focusing on is the textual flow, to see how the needs of Arjuna are addressed and how the purposes of Krishna are pursued. That was what we are going to focus on. And in that connection, the first thing we discussed was we're using the acronym TEACH. So timing. So Krishna lets Arjuna speak till Arjuna himself runs out of steam. In adult education, relevance, the need for teaching has to be felt, the need for learning. So by 2.7, Arjuna is ready to become a student. I don't know, or at least what I know is less than is what I need to know. He accepts Krishna as the teacher. So instead of being too eager to just pounce on students and dump knowledge on them, just wait for them to come to a point where they realize the inadequacy of what they know. And that will have, when the timing is right, the interest in the knowledge and the impact of the knowledge, both will increase. Then I was talking about expansion. That when Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, his focus is not so much on dismissing what Arjuna knows previously, but on building Arjuna's vision, expanding his vision of his concerns. So Arjuna had concern, say, for Bhishma's welfare. That concern was there. And what Krishna does is, yes, that concern is good, but the concern means there's a concern for the body and there is concern for the soul. So he says the body is temporary, the body is going to be destroyed, but you can help him to get a better body. So expansion means that we don't dismiss what the person knows previously, but rather we build on what that person knows. So just because we know about the soul doesn't mean we don't care for the body. We care for something more than the body. That okay, their soul is eternal and the body is like a dress, they'll get a better dress. So that was expanding or building on people's expansion of previous knowledge or previous concerns based on the knowledge that they have. So we build on that. And the last A was talking about appreciation. That when a student asks a question, at that time the teacher needs to appreciate where the student is coming from and appreciate the eagerness to learn. Even if the child is saying that, oh, student is saying that I can't, I find it very difficult. Even acknowledging that this is very difficult shows that the student is trying to learn this and also has the courage to express the vulnerability. Oh, I don't think I can do this. And in general, appreciation means that our purpose in educating should be to make the person feel understood and encouraged. Okay, yeah, it may be tough, but it's doable. So encouraging, appreciation means our overall tone should be of encouraging. Now, encouraging doesn't mean saying it's easy. That could be false. But it just means emphasizing that it's doable. It may be tough, but it is doable. So when we have this mood, then we all can move from in where whatever position we are in towards becoming more effective teachers. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments? Do we have time for questions? Yes, my Narasimha Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you very much for the enlightening session. My question is this: as a teacher, Krishna not just taught the Vedic wisdom, the theistic wisdom in terms of knowledge, he also supported that by showing his universal form, that is Pratyaksha Praman. So that's how we could see that Arjuna immediately became a transformed soul, ultimately, which is the purpose of the wisdom. Nashto moha smritirlabdha. But if you see in the contemporary scenario, there are teachers and students. As a student myself, how I should look for my teacher along with giving only the theoretical knowledge, wisdom, how I can relate with the practical realized knowledge from my teacher, and at the same time how I can present this to the newer audience, not just giving the theoretical part of it.
Okay, good question. So two things over here. The question was that Arjuna Krishna demonstrated what he taught by showing the Virat Rupa. So how can we both expect from our teachers or give to our students this realization? Well, we will come to the Virat Rupa in our next session, but since you brought this up, I'll quickly explain that actually Krishna does not rely on the Virat Rupa. You see, 10.8 to 11 is the Chaturshloki Gita. It is like a 4-verse summary of the Gita. And after that, from 10.12 to 16, Arjuna actually confirms. Arjuna says that Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavan. That Arjuna says, in one sense, this is Arjuna's self-understanding or Arjuna's conclusion that you are the supreme truth. You are the ultimate reality. And even in the 11th chapter, before he makes the request to ask that Krishna show the universal form, he says, Mohoyam vigato mama. That by what you have spoken, my moha is gone. So in one sense, the questions after 10.15, 16, they're all supplementary questions at the end of the class. So it is not that Krishna's core message depends on some supernatural demonstration. That supernatural demonstration of the universal form that is there, that supernatural demonstration that requires, not everybody can show the universal form, but that supernatural demonstration, it is not a central teaching. It is a supplementary teaching. The Arjuna is before. How do you know it's supplementary? Because even before that, Arjuna said, okay, my illusion is now dispelled. So this is something which I'll be discussing in the last part. R is rational. Teacher, when you talk about it, if you get to it. Actually, the point is Krishna does not throw around, he does not force Arjuna to accept anything based on his divinity. I am God, therefore you have to obey me. That is not Krishna's mood at all in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna uses reasoned arguments to educate and elevate Arjuna. So what could be the realizations that we expect? See, there is a supernatural visions or demonstrations, and there is a natural transformation. The natural transformation means that each one of us needs to both be transformed naturally in terms of this world. In terms of this world, we will find that by the practice of bhakti, our impurities, our anger, our craving, our greed, all these will go down. Kama, krodha, moha, or kama, krodha, lobha. All these will go down. And if we see this happening, that itself is a good indication that the person is getting transformed. And similarly, our purities. Purity means that our attraction towards Krishna, it could be our devotion, it could be our selflessness, our concern for others, our capacity to express that concern through our how we act to take care of them. All these are demonstrations of purity. So if we demonstrate all these, we will definitely be growing in our bhakti. So that's how this natural transformation is what we can see, we can look for in those who are our teachers. And these are the transformations that we can also try to manifest in our lives. So that's how we can also become teachers who don't just give wisdom, but also give realization. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. So there are a few questions you already typed in the chat. I'll take those one by one. So now engage appropriately. Now in today's world where the knowledge becomes obsolete very quickly, then in the IT world, for example, and existing knowledge may not be relevant. So then do we need to still talk about that principle? Yeah, of course. See, there the specific knowledge that one has learned. There is the capacity for learning. See, education has multiple aspects to it. One is the content that is learned. The other content to learn. There is the discipline to learn. That means discipline means, okay, if I had to learn this new subject, I have to put aside everything else. Every day I have to study 3-4 hours. For the next 1 month, I'll be able to complete the course. And then beyond that, there is a mood to learn. So yes, the content keeps changing. And sometimes the older content may not be relevant. But the discipline to learn, if somebody has studied a previous computer software language, software skill, and now they have to learn something new. The fact that they had learned something in the past indicates they have the discipline to learn. They can apply themselves and they can learn. So in every situation, one can look at what is deficient and highlight that, or we can look at what is present and highlight that. So that's what the ongoing learning. Don't disturb people's minds means. Yeah, as I said, it's not being unrealistic. It's not being giving people false hope. It's tough. Yeah, what you have learned in the past may not be relevant, but that does not mean that the fact that you have learned in the past is not relevant. The content may not be relevant, but the discipline that you have got is relevant. Okay. Yes, this will be uploaded on YouTube. Now, the needs and purposes. I talked about Arjuna's need. Arjuna's need was for reassurance. What was Krishna's purpose in the teaching of the Gita? I'll explain that in the next session. Now, okay. If someone is not open to the teaching of the Gita due to misconceptions, how can we inspire them to learn the right message? Well, the message of the Gita is very broad. We shouldn't reduce the Gita's message to certain bullet points. Oh, that this is, you're not the body of the soul, there is only one God, and that God is Krishna. There's a lot to the knowledge of the Gita. And everybody is at a particular place. So some people can approach the Gita from one particular point, others can approach the Gita from another point. Somebody else can approach the Gita from another point. So instead of thinking that we just have one script that we want to download on everyone, we need to understand the multifacetedness of the Gita's message and see where their present interest and the Gita's wisdom, where do they intersect? So everybody has some interests, and the Gita's message that requires us to observe people carefully and see if somebody is a parent and they want to be a responsible parent, then we can talk about how the Gita's message contains values that can help a person to understand how to appreciate the psychology of the child, how to understand that the child is not just their child. The child is an evolving soul who has come from a previous life, and that they need to build on what the child has got from the previous life, not just impose their own ideas of how the child should be. So depending on the present interests of the person, the present needs of the person, that aspect of the Gita's message that is relevant for them can be emphasized. That's how things can be grown. Okay. Now, there are a few other questions. We'll take maybe 2 more questions. Yes. Priti Rupani Radha Devi.
Prabhu, Hare Krishna, Dhanavats Prabhu. Prabhu,
Krishna.
it was a very, very clear and wonderful session. Thank you so much, Prabhu. And also, my doubt was, how can we motivate? There are people who come for Bhakti Vrikshas, they have interest to learn, and they're open to learn also. But how can we motivate them to apply and also stay committed? Because knowledge is one part. They come to learn Bhagavad Gita. But it is also important for them to understand that there is something that we need to put in practice, for which we need to stay committed. So when this encouragement part came, I was wondering how to really help them, because they've come halfway ready to listen. So kindly advise, Prabhu.
Yeah. Now, if we consider Krishna is the center of the Bhagavad Gita, in the sense that Krishna is not just a teacher, but ultimately Param Brahma, Param Dhama. It is Krishna who is to be ultimately attained. Arjuna surrenders to Krishna at the end of Gita. Now, there could be different pathways by which people come toward Krishna. Now, I'll just mention 4. There could be many more, but these are 4 broad categories. Some people come from the cultural pathway. That means that they come because they like the culture. Okay, do some kirtans, we can practice some rituals. There's a nice atmosphere in the temple. Some people may come from a philosophical pathway. They have some questions, they seek wisdom, and they're getting those questions answered. Some people may come from more from a social pathway. That means they want to hang out with good people. Now, okay, these people, they are spiritual, they are polite, they're courteous, they're helpful. Yeah, I like to be with these people. Some people may come from more from a psychological pathway. That means they feel the world is too much of an agitating place. They just want some place where I can be peaceful, where I can be calm, where I can gather my bearings back. So in general, if we look at people and talk with them, we can understand which pathway they are coming from by what they appreciate the most. Yeah, okay, what inspires you to come here? What they appreciate, and what absence if something is absent, what they criticize or what they complain if something is not there. By these 2 things, we can understand. When something is present, they appreciate it. When something is absent, they criticize it or they complain about it. By this, we can understand which pathway they are coming from. And the pathway that they are coming from, that is the pathway they are most likely to want to contribute to. So if they are coming primarily from the philosophical pathway, then we encourage them to become future teachers of this message. You share this with someone. We share this with your colleagues, with your relatives, with your friends. And then what support do you need for sharing this? You can say, if you want to formally teach, then it's good if you're practicing this also. And then you could be chanting some Hare Krishna mantra or whatever. We encourage them to go along that pathway. If somebody is coming from a social pathway, it's like to hang out with people. Then if there are festivals like Janmashtami or whatever, then, in our festival, we need somebody who greets and warmly welcomes newcomers. And that's the service they would like to do. If we tell them to come, can you come and do deity worship? Or you'd make this garland for the deities. They may or may not be interested. But if their interest social, they would like to, they'll be very careful when welcoming guests and very attentive and polite. So we have to find what is attracting people toward Krishna and then facilitate them on that path. And as they become more and more connected and attracted on that path, over a period of time, as they come closer and closer, they will become attracted to other aspects of Krishna also. Krishna is all attractive, but initially that attractiveness, all attractiveness manifests through one particular feature, facet. So we need to find that and attract them accordingly. And gradually other things they will take up. Yes, J.N. Subramaniam, J.V.N. Subramaniam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji. Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture, Prabhuji. It's I've been hearing your lectures for quite some time now, and wonderful, wonderful, Prabhuji. Thank you very much. Prabhuji, I have a small question. In the flow of Bhagavad Gita, I heard that Krishna initially chastises Arjuna, saying that you're talking like a learned man, and then of course he gets into the groove and then encourages him, as you rightly pointed out, Prabhuji. So is that mode of giving a shock treatment like what we do with our kids sometimes? Is that also a good way of teaching, Prabhuji, or what is the recommended path? Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yes. Does Arjuna give a shock treatment to Arjuna at this? Krishna gives Arjuna a shock treatment at the start of the Gita? Well, again, it depends on what you emphasize. So if we consider 2.11, every commentator of the Bhagavad Gita has a particular mood. And they will comment from that perspective. So if you consider 2.11, Ashochan and Vashochastam Pragyavadamscha Bhashase Gatasun and Gatasunscha Nanu Shochanti Panditaha. That you are lamenting for that which is not worthy of lamentation, and while you are speaking learned words, the emotions that you are expressing are ignorant. Now this could be seen as chastisement. And yes, there is certainly an element of chastisement in it. But at the same time, if you see the overall context, Krishna does not dwell on that chastisement for too long. Sometimes a person, when they start chastising, they have 15 minutes to answer a question, and 10 minutes they are chastising the person itself. What a foolish person, you think you are so clever. You see, in the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about 550 verses. Out of that, it's just one verse. Immediately after that, he is saying that, okay, now let's begin. And he focuses, no one here is going to die. Everybody is going to live here forever. So even if the chastisement is there, it's extremely brief. So it's not at all a prolonged, as they say, it's not he's not haranguing the person. It's not a harangue or a tirade, where the person is meant to feel belittled. And yes, of course, there are times when chastisement is required, and we will discuss that as a part of our next session. But the point is that overall, the emphasis is not that you are a fool. Emphasis is that let's learn now. So that emphasis is very, very important. If we emphasize too much that people are fools, then either they may resent us, the chastisement goes for too long. There are multiple things which may go wrong by that. One is they resent the teacher, or they reject the subject itself. No, this is too difficult. This is too, either this teacher is too harsh, so I don't want to learn this, or the subject is too difficult. That's why I don't want to learn it. Now, Jiva Goswami, in the same words, when he gives a commentary, he takes the same verse and he focuses on the first word, Ashochan. And he connects this with the last word that Krishna speaks, Ma Shuchaha. So Shuchaha and Shochan have the same root. And he says the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita can be encapsulated in the first and the last instructive word that Krishna has spoken. Ashochan, the first word is not worth lamenting. Ashochan. And Ma Shuchaha is don't lament. He says this indicates that the purpose of the Gita is to free us, free the world, in fact, from lamentation. So it's a very compassionate purpose. So yes, chastisement may be required, but the overall emphasis has to be of encouragement. Okay. Yes, Kapil Pohani ji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, I wanted to ask, in one of your lectures in Pune, you mentioned that you had a meeting with His Holiness Adhanat Swami Maharaj in America, and then you asked Maharaj that I'm not deliberately intellectual, but I'm like that only. So Maharaj told you that you just have to increase your concern for the audience. So I just wanted to ask that how you contemplated on that topic in instruction, and how you means how one teacher can develop more concern for the audience or the student.
Okay. How can a teacher increase the concern for the audience? Well, I think there are three ways to show concern. One is ask. Now we ask, okay, what if somebody asks, it was a good class. Okay, what did you like in the class? So one is ask the students themselves, ask the audience basically. What did they like? What did they not like? Especially, there are some people in the audience who do give candid feedback. Very few, but those who give, they're helpful. Then we can also ask the organizers. And often the organizers, although they will be respectful, but if we have a genuinely learning mood, if we have a mood of serving, then they also want to know, okay, this is what this speaker is good at speaking, and this is what this audience needs. Generally, when people also organize some programs, they try to find how they can match the audience with the speakers. So I think being open to learn is what is very helpful. And then lastly is ask ourselves. When we say ask ourselves, means that if we give some time for introspection, for looking back at what we did and what we could have done better, the Paramatma is there in our hearts, and the Paramatma can guide us. Okay, this is what I did. Could I have conveyed this in point in a slightly different way? Could this have been better? So we do these three things, and I feel it helps. And of course, I would include in the organizer, I would also include our guides. We have our Shiksha Gurus, we have Diksha Gurus, whoever are guiding us, we talk with them. Now, they may not be attending our classes all the time, but they also do get some feedback about this or that, and they learn from that. They may tell us certain points. So in general, teacher should not be thinking that my only purpose is teaching. A teacher may know the subject, but there is teaching the subject, which is only one part of teaching. But there is also learning how to teach the subject. And that is something which the teacher has to keep doing constantly, because the audience is different at different times. The audience comes from different backgrounds. And that's why if we have that mood, then we all can learn and improve. Thank you for that question. Hare Krishna. So, shall we stop here now? Prashant, I think you already asked the question, isn't it?
Guruji, Charan is
Yes.
first. Hare Krishna. No, I have not asked. My one question is that when Arjuna was knowing previously that war is to be waged against his very own relatives, so why only at the onset of war he realizes that?
Yes, that's because the gravity and finality of the war registers in him at that point. See, it's one thing to know that I have to fight against my relatives, but it's quite another thing to actually go on the battlefield. Arjuna has fought against the same army, more or less, earlier at Virat. But at that time, he had no intention of killing anyone. He defeated everyone, he wounded everyone slightly, and they fell back. But now it was not, that option was not there. One side was not going to go back alive. So that gravity and finality registered within him very heavily. That's why when he came in the middle of the battlefield and he saw both sides are my relative, this is a fratricidal war. So that's when that, do I really want to fight this? That question came within him. So the Bhagavad Gita actually presents a situation where good people have no good options. This is one of the most difficult situation to be in life. That Arjuna was a good person, he was a noble person, he was a principled person. And now fighting was a terrible option. But not fighting was also a terrible option. Fighting means killing his relatives, but not fighting means that people who were demoniac, people who were so brazen and shameless that they had tried to disrobe Draupadi in public, in the royal assembly, they would get unchallenged power. So that is also not a good option. So what does one do when one is in a situation like this? So that's why when good people have no good options, when that registers on them, so that registered in Arjuna in a extremely consequential way. And that's why you say, I just don't know what to do at this time. So that's the start of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. Thank you very much for your many thoughtful questions.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. So I saw one question that, yes, Shiraj, you get fascinated by Hare Krishna philosophy, just connect with the organizer and you can share your contact over there. They will give you opportunities to grow further and contribute further in your spiritual journey. Hare Krishna. So on the 11th, we'll have the second session where we'll discuss more features of Krishna as an exemplary teacher. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.